welcome Sunne Wright McPeak from the California Emerging Technology Fund. So great to have you on our podcast. I've been learning about the digital divide. I've been trying to get smart on it, but it's just not working. I need professional assistance, and that's why you're here, to help us understand the digital divide, how it works, what we really need to do as a community in this state, and where do we go from here. So before we get into the technical stuff, tell us a little about your background. How did you end up here? Obviously, former California Transportation Secretary, but a little bit about your background and how you ended up at the California Emerging Technology Fund.
Thank you. And first of all, you know a lot about the digital divide, and I appreciate so much just the opportunity to work with you and now chat with you. So my background is somewhat of an interesting journey. I grew up on a small dairy farm in the San Joaquin Valley. And I actually was the first in my family to graduate from college.
Nice.
I have a background, a master's degree in public health. I've worked in public health community centers and learned pretty quickly that public health is actually administered by counties. And so I was drawn into becoming a county supervisor, an elected member of the County Board of Supervisors in Contra, Costa County for 4 terms. Then I realized when I was a public official elected in the year that Prop 13 passed and there was absolutely no money, that we needed to actually learn how to grow the economy.
Right.
And I was then recruited to head up the Bay Area Economic Forum, sponsored by the Bay Area Council, the major employers of the region, and the Association of Bay Area Governments. It was a public-private partnership. 3 years later, the longtime executive officer of the Bay Area Council retired. I then was engaged by those CEOs to serve for 7 years before I was recruited to be the Secretary of Business, Transportation, Housing for the state of California. And at the time, having worked, even going back to when I was a county supervisor, we focused on advanced communications as key for quality communities, smart communities, et cetera. We promoted that at the Bay Area Council as a strategy for mobility, for transportation. And so when I went to the state and had oversight with transportation, I, from the very beginning, talked about broadband as a green strategy being incorporated into transportation, because as I used to say to my friends at the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans,
Right.
the best trip is a virtual trip.
Yeah.
If I can unload a trip from the surface network, I'm relieving traffic congestion, but at the same time, reducing an impact on the environment. So back in 2004, 5, and 6, that seemed a little out there.
Right.
It's only now that it is becoming absolutely what the state is promoting.
You were ahead of your time.
It seems that those who taught me got me ahead of the time of maybe these times,
Right.
but it was absolutely on target. And so then the California Public Utilities Commission, with the vision of Susan Kennedy and President Michael Peavy, decided in 2005 that there needed to be a statewide organization with the mission to close the digital divide. At that time, there were some pretty big mergers happening. SBC was buying AT&T. They kept the name AT&T.
Right.
And then Verizon was buying MCI.
Right.
And those transactions in 2005 ended up with a so-called voluntary agreement from the successor companies to put up the seed capital for this organization that the PUC decided would be called the California Emerging Technology Fund. Had I known we were still going to be in business, 15 years later, we would have changed the name to talk about broadband or getting connected. But here we are.
Right.
And the board of CETF was put in place per the PUC order that actually spelled out how that first board was to be constituted. And those directors recruited me.
Wow.
That's the story.
And,
That's how I ended up.
and you're sticking to it. Okay. You know,
Yes, I'm too dumb to give up.
you just explained actually my two kind of burning questions, the linkage between transportation and the digital divide. So thank you for that perfect explanation, and really what the goal of or the seed of the California Emerging Technology Fund. It's a mouthful to say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, of course, but now it's evolving into something not only relevant, but a driving force in our statewide conversation about the divide. I don't know what we would have done without kind of the structures and the parameters that I think your organization is putting around this conversation. So, how do you see your priorities? I mean, we've been in so many conversations locally, statewide. How do you see your priorities evolving with where we are today with the divide?
It's very insightful that the PUC, and it was really, again, President PV, Susan Kennedy as a commissioner, who had this vision, because what they thought was important is a not-for-profit that is mission driven, but with extraordinary public reporting responsibilities.
Mm,
And I think that's a very interesting model.
mm,
CETF by state statute actually reports to the legislature every year through the PUC. The PUC has nothing to say about the governance of our nonprofit organization,
right.
but they do collect the report that goes to the legislature. They review it, they ask questions, they edit it, they send it to the legislature. And by another statute that was actually authored by Senator Alex Padilla, then State Senator
Sure.
Padilla, who's now our U.S. Senator. The CETF is the only non-state agency on the California Broadband Council. And so this kind of governance where a nonprofit has responsibility that is totally in the public interest, but to bring together all the stakeholders, is one that we think should be replicated for other major challenges. So that's number one.
Mhm.
When we began, the seed capital was actually $60 million, very,
Wow.
very substantial. As I used to say to this farm girl,
Mm,
60 million is a hell of a lot of money, but California is a very big state.
right.
And so we started with the notion we had to leverage those dollars working with existing leadership structures. We worked with, first, voluntary collections of leaders in regions, because we knew, as all major infrastructure, broadband has to be at scale.
Right.
Roads don't stop at a city boundary or a county boundary, nor does a electricity transmission line, nor does broadband. You have to be at scale for these mega infrastructure deployments to really have economies of scale. And so we worked with regional leaders. That became the foundation for what we today call the Regional Broadband Consortia. We funded all of those initially to do needs assessment and demand aggregation.
Hmm.
Senator Padilla then saw the value of those entities as leadership structures, and provided they would be funded from the California Advanced Services Fund. We then looked at, even though 60 million is a lot of money, that doesn't buy a whole lot of infrastructure. So we look at the challenge of closing the digital divide in sort of two dimensions. On one hand, it is the infrastructure, the supply, which we call deployment.
Hmm.
On the other hand, it is the demand side. It is the consumers using that infrastructure, which we call adoption.
Mm,
And you have to drive both. Infrastructure is necessary, but not sufficient. Moreover, technology is really just a tool.
mhm.
It's a very powerful tool. It is a very empowering tool, but it is just a tool, and therefore it has relevance to people when it's used in the context of something that's important to them on their daily lives.
Sure.
How do I bank? How do I get an education? Can I go to the DMV online? Can it save me time, save me money? That's what technology does.
Sure.
And so we then developed a whole set of strategies around how to embed technology and high-speed internet use into all strategies for major problems:
Mhm.
healthcare, education, workforce preparation. And then, of course, our priority is getting very low income households, all those who are unconnected,
Mhm.
who are low income, often don't speak English at home, have never had a computer that they've used. So all of that are barriers to overcome. And it can only be done in language and in culture by a trusted messenger.
Right.
The community-based organizations who know their communities, who can do outreach in language, in culture, who can explain to me if I don't know anything about the internet, I've never had a computing device, why should I prioritize subscribing to internet service instead of buying groceries?
Right.
Well, somebody that I trust is going to tell me I can actually get a whole lot time save back on my side. I can actually even save money. I can access various services and resources that would take me forever riding buses all over town to be able to do. And so we have a network of more than 100 community-based organizations that have become very good in incorporating what we call digital inclusion
Mhm.
into their programs. Digital inclusion means you literally reach out, find people who aren't connected, explain to them why it's important to them, help them find a device that they can afford. Maybe it's a refurbished device that they can purchase, or maybe there's a voucher from a company that's offering service that is affordable. Help them find that affordable internet subscription, help them navigate through signing up for that service, and then helping them become digitally proficient.
Mhm.
Even if they have an affordable device or affordable internet offered, unless somebody can teach them how to use a device, they're not going to spend any money on.
Right.
So that's what we do.
Right.
That has been an evolving experience.
Right.
And then we never anticipated a pandemic
Right.
in which our public officials issued shelter in place orders that lasted 16 months. We're still doing a workout, and suddenly the 13 million households in California, except for those who are essential workers who had to leave their homes to help us all have food on the table, or the healthcare workers on the front lines, or our safety workers. When you have that many people trying to be online simultaneously for many hours out of the day, it puts a strain on the network that none of us ever anticipated, right?
Right.
It's amazing that for the most part, we have very robust backbones. We have very robust for backhaul, the middle mile that exists. The system, the network actually stayed up.
Right.
But if you're at home with 3 children trying to get online simultaneously for their school work and you don't have enough bandwidth, that's not going to work even if you have hotspots.
Right.
And so we had brought home in very, very graphic terms, not only a spotlighting of the digital divide, but we think it revealed a digital cliff.
Right.
There are people who are very digitally disadvantaged, and they tend to be all low income,
Right.
are just falling off into deeper poverty, greater isolation. And that made all the difference to our policymakers to literally move up in priority. We've got to have high speed internet everywhere, and everybody has to have the opportunity to get online.
Right. I mean, you're right. No one anticipated a global pandemic, and the fact that the system held is really a testament to some luck and some obviously digital infrastructure that we did have. I mean, California is a well-off state compared to some other states. Other folks I think had a tougher time. Um, and who would have known that the digital divide would become maybe wider as a result? I mean, we used to think home essentials are water, sewer, lights. I mean, really, if you're gonna be without something for 24 hours, I think people would be rather be without some of those amenities, but not their cell phones, not their communication device, right?
Yes, you are so right. In fact, surveys have revealed that,
Right.
or focus groups, that were, just think about how many devices do you have at home? We all have a combination, if we're middle income or higher income, that are wireline and wireless,
Right.
multiple devices, a mobile, one or two mobile devices.
Sure.
We probably have at least one, if you will, computing device that has a keyboard to it. It
Right.
may be a laptop, it may be, a desktop. And then there's probably tablets sitting around that we
Right.
use.
Right. And but what's funny, the more devices we have, the more we go on with this technology integration into our being, the less patient we become.
Oh, yeah. Which means we need higher and higher
Higher,
bandwidth,
that's
right?
right. Higher and higher, whether you're, well off or not so well off, you're still a human being. You still grow impatient. And if you hit download on something, if it takes anything more than a few seconds, your attention span moves on. So uh, I get it now. I think it's becoming more clear. You're also involved with an organization that we're all involved in, the Southern California Association of Governments, and so some of the strategic planning that CETF is doing, and working with these regional bodies. How do you see it moving? What does success look like in 2022 with the federal funding that hopefully everybody will get, and then we'll know how to use it, right?
Yes, success looks like a coordinated effort, region by region, supporting and helping develop and submitting applications for the priority middle mile to serve last mile projects.
Right.
And that is what the Southern California Association of Governments, headed up, led by Comia GC, is doing. That is what the San Diego Association of Governments, headed up by Hassan Nakrata, is doing. They came together under the umbrella called Southern California Transformation
Right.
that Steve Pontel has facilitated. That's 216 local governments, an amazing collection of local governments all working together, representing 60% of the population.
Right.
What we think is so valuable is not only obviously is that scale,
Mhm.
but also so many of those cities, their boundaries connect each other, and you go, if you're on the 710, you're going to, or the 405 or the 10, you're going to travel through multiple counties and many cities. And so that coordination has to be done at a regional level, but with the active participation of each city and each
Right.
county.
Right.
It is not abdication by local government, it's actually an alliance by local government for a strategic business advantage. So then success is we get agreement around exactly which projects and submitted by whom will be what we want to back as a region to go get our fair share of state and federal dollars.
Right.
Getting our fair share of the state and federal dollars, not wasting any of the public's money, be it taxpayer or ratepayer,
Right.
is what success looks like. And that's why you also will hear this California Emerging Technology Fund, SCAG and SANDAG, talk about we want partnerships with the private sector. We also want, all companies who are investing in California to be successful, they have to report to shareholders.
Sure.
We start from the premise that where the infrastructure is inadequate, the market actually doesn't operate. There's just not enough profit. No company is not going to make a profit if they see an opportunity, right? And so where are those hardest to reach areas? They are rural, remote, including all the tribal lands in California.
Right.
There are many very large tribal lands in
Mhm.
Southern California.
Mhm.
And the market also doesn't operate in high poverty urban neighborhoods.
Right.
There's often a middle mile infrastructure that is either close or actually running through these high poverty urban neighborhoods, because it's easier to pull a permit to tear up the streets in a low income community than in a high income community. So oftentimes that's where the infrastructure runs.
Mhm.
What hasn't been done is to actually build out the robust connections to all of the homes by the internet service provider or providers that are in that community, because there's not enough of the residents who can afford the cost of what it would take to do that build out. That's where a subsidy is also needed from the public sector.
Right.
And so working with the ISPs who want to be partners, not only to have the benefit of support to accelerate what they're already planning to invest of their own dollars, but then to use that opportunity to get to the hardest to reach is what we want when we're calling for proposals. So both the Southern California Association of Governments and the San Diego Association of Governments are going to issue in the next month or so what are called requests for partnerships. It's an RFP of some sort, but it's saying, do you want to step up and be our partner? If you don't, that's okay. It's a free world, but we're going to focus on those companies who step up, as I say, step into the circle.
Right.
And as a part of doing that, now you show us your infrastructure subject to non-disclosure. We will protect your proprietary interest, obviously. But what we need to know is how can you get to those high poverty urban areas in neighborhoods that are not a build out yet of the high speed internet infrastructure. How can you help us get to all the remote rural communities and tribal lands?
Right.
And as a result, we're going to focus on working with you so you get to build 5G along the way, that you get to, we'll work to get permits sooner rather than later for you. That's the value of this sort of step up or step aside.
Right.
And why do we think that works best?
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole lot of infrastructure that the internet service providers have already built and we have paid for either as customers, i.e. ratepayers, or in some cases there's been subsidies, so we paid for them as taxpayers. We want to see what is already built be used in the public interest and still continue to serve the interest of private investment attracted to California.
Right. So, you mentioned housing a little earlier, and I've seen conversation with the digital divide and housing. I also saw a shocking statistic, that we used to build something like 26 million homes in this country every year or so. Now it's something like 5 or 6 million a year. So the housing crisis seems like it's exasperating the divide, because we were simply not building enough affordable housing, which would have, of course, been new customer bases for the ISPs, right? They go where the demand is, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that nexus, housing and the divide, because some of these rural areas may always be rural, or at some point they'll be populated, maybe not the Native American reservations, but some of the other rural areas will. So how do you see housing on population basis intersecting with the divide?
It's all part and parcel of the same, both challenge and opportunity to tackle poverty.
Right.
So let me just start with the lens we have at the California Emerging Technology Fund. The digital divide is just another manifestation of the economic divide.
Right.
And that economic divide, concentrated persistent poverty, is rooted in systemic racism. And if we don't understand what goes on, these interrelated factors, forces in low-income communities that make it very, very tough for someone to escape poverty, then we're never going to be successful in actually either closing the digital divide and certainly not tackling poverty. So that's my lens. And I started out, as I said, in public health, and I realized I can't help people get well if they don't have a job,
Right.
if they are subjected to so much either trauma in their lives, which has a stress and can spark what is called trauma these days, or mental illness, dependency on drugs and alcohol and other drugs, or that they might live in a community where the environment isn't very clean. So all of those things have to be taken into account. Now, you mentioned housing. I have spent a lifetime in one way or another trying to get the public sector to join forces, first of all, align their resources and join forces with the private sector on tackling poverty. It's actually not rocket science if I can figure it out. But you do have to bring together several things, and housing is the linchpin of what we call a triple bottom line investment policy, or the three E's, where the environment, equity, and the economy are understood by everybody to be part and parcel of each other, not trade-offs. And in my simple, farm girl mentality, we need to have a prosperous economy, a clean environment, and share both with more people. The wealth gap in our country is largely because we do not have enough housing for everybody. Most of us, if we weren't born into either wealth or political privilege, if we have any nest egg at all, it's because we bought a home, we were able to buy a home, and we built equity. When I was secretary in 2000, became secretary in 2003, one of the first major reports I asked to deliver to the legislature was how far behind we are in housing production in California. Then it was 250,000 housing units a year that we were behind. It's only gotten worse. And home ownership has become farther and farther out of the grasp of most of Californians. And you have to get to production. It's really a simple thing. It's supply demand, right? What most people don't understand, though, Shariar, is that the supply issue is land. It's not just production. If there's not enough land that is designated in and general plans and zoned, that is essentially by right, and the time frames have to be long enough in that housing supply to match real estate investment cycles, which basically are about a decade. And if that's not there, then the market doesn't operate to meet the demand from the consumers. The home builders simply can't find the land on which to build. And our state, through several administrations, has failed. Our country has failed to understand. Let me repeat, if we care about the economy, equity, environment, it starts with housing. I just like Bill, draw these little Venn diagrams that I love, and the intersection is where housing goes. So yes, then when we do housing for anybody, it has to be smart housing. No more dumb infrastructure. If we're going to build a road, we're going to build a water system, anything we're going to build, it better have high-speed internet incorporated in it. We better look at it as hubs. And of course, all of the communities have to be connected. Broadband is actually pretty cheap to build if you are building it at the time that everything else is going in, right? It's the retrofit that is so expensive.
And I was wondering if SB 9, the lot split, the law that I think the governor signed a couple of weeks ago, how that's going to affect. Obviously, the hope is that where possible, anyone that with a lot can split it and build a duplex and live there for a while, and hopefully that will accelerate some, dealing with this housing issue, which, as you say, that's really the core. That's what's creating so much poverty in one of the wealthiest states in the world. The gap isn't just digital; it's physical as well. So, getting back to really what success looks like in 2022, you mentioned partnerships, request for partnerships. You mentioned your work with the regions to continue. Obviously, hopefully there'll be money raining in these regions, and hopefully there'll be magical alignment with all these cities as to where to spend the money. I don't know. I've been in public service a long time. I've never seen two cities agree on one thing, let alone 216 cities. But there does seem to be a regional alignment and a recognition of this imperative, which is new, right? I mean, a few years ago, I don't know if we could have said that, but now we realize, and COVID had made it crystal clear, that there is a divide. It has a impact on our communities, which is just undeniable. School kids, telehealth, I mean, all of that stuff. So um, I just hope we get it right in the time we have with the enormous funding that's coming. That is a rare opportunity. I haven't seen things with a B raining down on cities, regions, and if they're smart enough to use it right, to leverage it correctly, partner with industry, use it for that last mile to really make a difference. I hope we can get it right.
I so share your hope, and I pray for divine intervention for us mortals to be able to pull that off. The signs are so hopeful.
Right.
When I have the opportunity to sit in meetings every 2 weeks, and there are county supervisors from each county, that there is their county office of education, their chief information officer, that there are organizations or sub-regional groups of cities who've come together that are participating. Sandag had a unanimous vote when they adopted a resolution to achieve digital equity as an example. All of that is very, very hopeful.
Right.
One of the things that I think is important to just maybe talk about is, so what's the dynamic that is the centripetal force? Not centrifugal that tends to throw everybody out of the circle, but what's the centripetal that brings everyone together? And I think it is when the public sector does some amazing collaborations that make it investment ready for the private sector to step up. A very good example is that Sandag and Caltrans, District 11, realized there was an opportunity coming up when a scheduled project to resurface a State Route 67 in San Diego County was about to go to bid. I mean, this is an approved project from the region, from the California Department of Transportation, and from the California Transportation Commission. And SCAG and Caltrans, it was, I remember this day in April where Jack Christensen from Sandag calls me and Chris Schmidt from Caltrans on the very same day and says, we have this crazy idea. We think we should try to incorporate fiber into the resurfacing project. What do you think? And I said, I think that's brilliant. Go for it. And I asked them as I sort of put on my old secretary's hat and started asking, some detailed questions about cost per mile, cost per foot. Where are you? Where do you think you're going to get the money? Those kinds of questions. They were willing to tackle it. That was extraordinary leadership from the public sector. They got, in a record period of time, an additional $7 million because that was going to be the added cost. Sandag put up money, the county of San Diego put up money, and the California Transportation Commission put up additional dollars. In 6 weeks, those public agencies came together, interrupted, if you will, what was a scheduled project, found 7 million more, and now they are incorporating fiber into that resurfacing project. They then put out an RFP to the public, to the private sector to say, okay, who wants to do the micro-trenching? Who's going to use the fiber? It's about 18 miles it'll be installed. That's really, really an important part of the centripetal force. On the other side, here's my plea to all of the private companies that are internet service providers, to the business community. When you step up and your leadership is there to practice what I call the politics of yes, that is so compelling that you can actually align a lot of effort in the government sector, in the public sector. So that's the magic of keeping everybody, if you will, herding the cats.
Right.
Is literally leadership that keeps causing the other partners to want to act.
Right. And taking advantage of opportunities that bring us together, which is rare in public-private partnerships, right?
Oh, yes, there's a
Yeah,
ton of money. So on top of that, when we file comments at the California Public Utilities Commission, we say prioritize giving money to the regions who have done the planning, who
right,
are working together. We make
right,
the same comments to the federal government.
right. And you mentioned the cities passing resolutions, and we've talked about this, in Caltrans and the Broadband Action Council, and as I mentioned, a lot of aspirational statements and ribbon cuttings and photo ops needs to trickle down to the agencies, to the counter. So exactly as you said, governments are able to incentivize private industry investment. So it will make sense. It will just magic. It's not magic. If it pencils out, it pencils out, and then suddenly, private companies can invest. And I'll give you an example of at least a government agency I used to work with for 15 years. The Port of San Diego did this with its leasing policy.
Yes.
So they developed a leasing policy and to incentivize the hotels, motels, marinas to build on state tidelands. And for more investment, the more you invested, the more lease term you got, right? So it was, there was an equation to it and there was some, politicking around it, of course. But for the most part, most of what you see happening in the past 20 years on the San Diego waterfront comes from that incentivized plan where government agency partners with private to expedite. And of course, the government agency does all the entitlements and all the bureaucratic stuff. Private agency just kind of the private company just goes in and brings in the money. Those hotels go up. So
You make it investment ready, and San Diego is beautiful.
right,
And that's a lot of hard work to make it happen such that it all fits together in a way that is very aesthetic, right?
right,
And respectful of the environment, because
right.
if you're going to build on tidal lands, you have to actually get the State Lands Commission to approve. So
Yeah,
yes, congratulations to what you did.
yeah,
And I know it started with this really, the brilliance that you and your colleagues had as professionals. The San Diego Port Authority had to pass a resolution and say yes. Then you had all of the hard work of you have to put one foot in front of the other. You work out all of those details. And that's where we're at in Southern California, is getting to those next layers of details.
right. Well, we're on the right track. We've learned so much from you, Sunne McPeak. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just a little bit smarter on this. I'm going to keep trying. I won't let you down. Maybe I'll get a B- if you give me a test tomorrow, just like college. But I really think this is an important conversation. I really want to keep trying to make the public smart about it, trying to create little pockets of collaboration where we can facilitate public-private dialogue and conversation and alignment with the stakeholders and get this right. I don't know if it'll all happen in 2022, but I think we're on the right track and we got to take advantage of it especially since there's funding, there's alignment, there's political will. The rest is a little bit of luck.
Yeah, yes, and you are so right, and I give you an A+ for A, your commitment, and B, your leadership. So you are there, and thank you so much for helping this whole effort to close the digital divide, achieve digital equity in California, become a reality.
Thank you for joining us, Sunne Wright McPeak.